Imagine this. You are the greatest military power of your time. Your legions have marched thousands of miles. Your walls hold continents apart. And yet here you are, sitting across a negotiating table, paying money to the very people you call barbarians. Not because you lost, because by your own calculations, it's cheaper. This isn't weakness, it's strategy. That, at least, is how it seemed at first. Behind this decision, gold instead of blood, lies one of the most seductive and, at the same time, one of the most destructive mechanisms in the history of great powers. Because what begins as cold calculation transforms with startling speed into something else entirely, a dependency, a trap, a slow suffocation from within. And the most terrifying part, empires felt it happening. They simply could not stop. Rome paid, heavily and regularly, to the Goths, the Huns, the Vandals, peoples whom Roman writers described with barely concealed contempt. It was dressed in elegant language, subsidies to allies, gifts for peace, payment to federates. But in substance, it was one thing: protection money, payment to be left alone. And in the beginning, it worked. It genuinely worked. Maintaining a legion cost enormous sums. A border war cost even more. A barbarian chieftain who received gold went home, or simply didn't attack. The arithmetic was straightforward. A payment was cheaper than a campaign. The treasury was satisfied, the senators were at ease, the provinces were intact. But then something else began to happen. The chieftain who returned home with gold returned with something more valuable: status. Around him grew authority. Other tribes observed, here is a man Rome pays. That means Rome fears him, which means one must either align with him or secure the same arrangement. And the following spring, it wasn't one chieftain at the border, it was 2 or 3, each wanting his share. Rome paid again, because it was cheaper. Then it got worse. Barbarian leaders began to understand the mechanics. There was no need to actually attack. All it took was mustering a force, planting it at the border, and waiting. Negotiators appeared on their own. The money flowed on its own. It was a perfect business with minimal risk. Threaten, collect, withdraw, repeat. And Rome? Rome saw all of this clearly. Historians wrote about it, advisors warned about it, but the system had already turned against anyone who wanted to dismantle it. To stop the payments meant provoking an immediate strike, right now, this very summer. Strategy is always about the future. Politicians live in the present, and so they paid again. But that is still not the most interesting part. The most interesting part came afterward. Regular payments accomplished something invisible and irreversible. They legitimized the barbarians as a political force. Tribes that had previously been amorphous, unpredictably fragmented, now had chieftains with steady income, with resources, with the means to maintain professional warriors and conduct their own diplomacy. Rome, with its own gold, was manufacturing structured, organized, wealthy adversaries. It was as if you paid your neighbor regularly to keep him from breaking your fence, and he used that money to hire guards, build a house, buy up the surrounding land, and gradually grow larger than you. Then Rome took one more step. It began recruiting barbarians into its own service. This too seemed logical. They were formidable fighters. Paying them as soldiers was cheaper than fighting them as enemies. They were called federates, allied barbarian units commanded by their own chieftains, but nominally in Rome's employ. And this is where a crack appeared inside the system that could never be sealed. because a barbarian chieftain in Roman service was a man who simultaneously understood Roman military tactics, knew the vulnerabilities of the frontier, grasped the inner workings of imperial politics, maintained ties at court, and all the while preserved his loyalty to his own people. This was not a soldier, this was an insider with an army. In 376, the Visigoths crossed the Danube, and Rome let them through. Because soldiers were needed, because the gold was running out, because there seemed to be no other choice. 2 years later, at Adrianople, those same Visigoths annihilated a Roman army and killed Emperor Valens. This was not an accident. It was the inevitable outcome of a logic Rome had been building for decades. Pay, recruit, integrate, turned against itself with perfect precision. And then came Alaric, a Visigoth chieftain who had served in the Roman army, who knew Rome from the inside, who demanded payments and received them, and who in 410 sacked the Eternal City. Not because he was an external enemy Rome had underestimated, but because he was a product of the very system Rome had created, nurtured, and armed. This is where the true paradox lives. Rome was not conquered by a force it didn't know. It was undone by a force it had built itself. Every payment, every subsidy, every treaty signed with a barbarian chieftain, none of it was a step toward peace. Each one was a small brick in the wall of future defeat. And those bricks were laid year after year, decade after decade, until the wall stood inside Rome itself. The story of paying the barbarians is not a story about greedy savages and feeble emperors. It is a story about the systemic trap that catches precisely the strongest. Those who know how to count money, those who know how to avoid losses, those who know how to negotiate. Because every rational decision taken in the moment imperceptibly shifted the balance. And by the time the shift became undeniable, there was nothing left to stop. The most terrifying thing in this story is not that Rome paid the barbarians. The most terrifying thing is that Rome was right. Every single time it paid, it genuinely was cheaper than war. Every time. Right until the very end.
You don't want to miss our next video, so make sure to subscribe.